Welcome to the Grey Eye and Disability Arts online podcast, Disability And, bringing together thoughtful discussion and debate. This month, Colin Hambrook, editor of Disability Arts Online, chats with writer and performance poet Allan Sutherland about the launch of Electric Bodies, a collection of poems based on the lives of 8 disabled artists. This podcast contains some strong language.
Hi. We've been working on the Electric Bodies project over a few years now. It's part of a larger research programme led by Bath Spa University called D4D. We've published Allan Sutherland's poetry collection, currently available in print and due to be available in audio soon. Electric Bodies tells the life stories of disabled artists Matt Fraser, Tony Heaton, Catherine Araniello, Robin Surgener, Vicky Rayford-Sinnott, Julie McNamara, Jess Tom, and myself.
So, Allan, it's great to have you.
Good to be here.
Can you tell us a bit about transcription poetry, where it came from, how you got the idea for it?
It started off just as oral history. For quite a long time, I've felt that we as disabled people, as a disability arts movement, we needed to ensure that what we're doing wasn't forgotten. We needed to look at ways of preserving our work. And as part of that, I was thinking about doing some oral history work. And then I got the news that Paddy Macefield, who was a leading figure, a leading sort of bit behind the scenes figure, so somebody who people who knew about disability arts would know it was very important, but wasn't a kind of known name like a number of artists are. He was the person who'd worked with the Arts Council and others to make sure that work happened and was valued. And then Paddy was told that he got 3 months to live. And I thought it was really important to try and record Paddy's story. So I went down there and interviewed Paddy. Paddy had some severe ME, which restricted how we could work together. So I went down and stayed with him and his wife. And then when Paddy felt up to it, we worked together. And then other times Paddy would go to bed and I'd do other things. So we got that interview done. And then a little while later, I read an article in the Oral History Journal, which talked about using poetry as a way of transcribing oral history interviews so as to get a more accurate indication of how people had been speaking. And that just made me think, I wonder if you could use the techniques of poetry with an oral history interview to produce poetry. And fortunately, I'd got this fairly recently completed transcription of the interview with Paddy. And so I thought, well, let's give it a go with that. Sold you the idea, as I remember.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to give you credit for that, Colin, because this whole transcription poetry journey, you've been there as a supportive editor from the very beginning, and I really appreciate that. So we took that transcription, and I tried editing it into poems, and found that actually it worked very well to do that. My background is not really poetry. My background is in script writing. So in creating one of these cycles of poetry, it's kind of like a script telling the story of somebody's life. So each poem in the cycle is kind of like a scene in a film or a play. One thing that I remember talking to you about at the time that was very interesting, even right at the beginning, was how much the voice of the person being interviewed comes through that process.
Very strongly.
And I found that even when I do public readings, still the individual voice of the person who's been interviewed comes strongly through that process, which is great. That's exactly what I would want.
And in terms of the value of recording life histories in this way as transcription poetry cycles, what are the strengths of that, do you think?
I think the first thing to emphasize about the process is it produces transcriptions. And that's a key part of what I'm doing each time I do one of these cycles. I'm creating a transcription which will go into a library and be there for researchers to use as a public document, telling one part of the history of our movement. I did an oral history training day some years back. And one of the things that I learned there was it's really important to do a transcription, because researchers haven't got time to listen to loads and loads of tapes, but you can scan a transcription quite quickly to find out if there's anything relative to the work that you're doing. So you've got to have the transcription for the work to be useful to researchers and to history. But then turning it into poetry tells the story in a different way. Using poetry as a way of doing that gives it all the strengths of sort of emotion and humor and a sort of forcefulness, and one's able to edit it. An academic paper I wrote in about 2010, I warned that that what I do with this is a good way of producing literature, but it's something that academics, I feel, should be wary of, because in using the techniques of poetry and of editing into a story, you're doing something very powerful, which isn't necessarily the same thing that academics want to do. You're telling the story in a very particular way in what you choose to leave in and leave out. And that's, it's like writing a biography rather than somebody just telling their own story.
I guess for research purposes, a poetry cycle is also to find the details that you're looking for. That element of it being honed that little bit further aids research.
I think so. I think it certainly sells the material. And in doing a whole lot of these together, as we've done on D4D and on electric bodies, it's very interesting to see the patterns across all these different people with quite different backgrounds. And also in telling all those stories narrated by people who themselves are important artists, are important tellers of stories. I was thinking today about how there's stuff that comes up that you wouldn't normally get told in other forms. There's a poem of Matt Fraser's where he talks about how he's having a kind of midlife crisis, and how his partner has said he ought to go for counselling, But he says, but the trouble is, Alan, I don't trust a non-disabled person to do that. And I get that. But I think the idea that disabled people don't trust non-disabled people is not one that's been put out there very much.
It's not considered important, is it? The trust of a disabled person generally.
It doesn't occur to them that we wouldn't be grateful, that we wouldn't trust them for their help. But I think the stories that people have to tell and the combination of all these different stories give quite a clear message about why that should be.
Are there other lessons that you learned through this process of doing such, a cohort of 8 subjects in one overall project?
Well, it's always interesting hearing the individual details of particular people's lives and the stuff that's happened to them. And because they're such a varied group of people, it's quite a different set of experiences that they've had. For example, Catherine Araniello talks about being sent away to a special boarding school when she was very little, and then not being given a mechanized wheelchair until she was 8. So she basically didn't have any mobility, which is quite a shocking thing. And against that, you have other people who weren't born disabled but became disabled. So you have Tony Heaton, for example, who's been a really important voice in the disability arts movement, becoming disabled when he had a motorbike accident at the age of about 16. But seeing across the set of poems, seeing people coming from all these different backgrounds, all these different experiences of disability, but really ending up with similar kind of approaches. One reason that I cite for doing this is we have in the past defined disability arts, or I've defined it, as being art made by disabled people about the experience of disability. And what these poems do is they tell us what that experience has been in different ways for quite different people. And that's obviously really informative. And then there's stuff like, I never realized that punk was so important to disability arts. That's a kind of generational thing, I think. After my time, punk, you see.
I wouldn't say it was a surprise to me, but I think because punk was about embracing otherness.
Yeah.
It was a natural fit. You didn't belong in the disco. You didn't belong in the sort of fashionable places, but you could always find a place with the other outcasts within the punk movement. Another thing, about the whole process that's been so interesting is just how many of us coming from very different experiences are go through similar processes of grappling with the idea of being a disabled person and claiming that identity as a positive, as a constructive thing, and having an epiphany.
That's one thing that I really hadn't realized before doing that. And I think the word epiphany, which is the word that you gave to it, is a good one. It really surprised me to find out how defining yourself as a disabled person is completely different from being disabled or recognized. So with Tony Heaton, for example, when he had his motorbike accident, it's like he recognized that he was now a wheelchair user, but he didn't take on the identity of I'm a disabled person at that point. It was only subsequently that he started doing that. And And there are some very interesting stories about those moments of epiphany.
Can you cite one or two of them, perhaps?
Well, Matt Fraser talks about when he was a crusty and playing in a band and whatever, seeing two girls looking at him at a railway station and realizing that what they were seeing was him as crusty, not him as disabled person, and thinking that isn't the identity that I want. So he went back and told his band, I'm going on to be a disabled person now. And they said, "But bloody time too. We've been wondering when you'd get there."
There was a similar story in Catherine Oraniello's narrative as well, wasn't there? Although she was much younger, but she had a series of dreams about being carted off in a van with disabled people and
she describes very, very graphically a dream that she had when she was about 4 years old, before being taken off to special school, where she saw disabled people as like a bunch of freaks that she was going to be imprisoned with. For some people, disability, impairment and the label of disabled person has been something that they've lived with from a very early age. But disability arts, I think, has been a way that people have found to actually go to that as something that they see as being something positive in their lives.
I think it was real serendipity that you managed to catch Catherine Oraniello before she sadly passed away. She's such an important artist, I think, of the last 30 years, and it seems a tremendous injustice that she never had, apart from within disability arts circles, she never had a wider acclaim that she deserved.
I think she had some recognition within the live art movement, which is where she chose to position herself.
It's a great strength of Catherine's work that the Live Art Development Agency recognised her value and importance, and went to the trouble actually of documenting quite a lot of her work in video and text. That record, I think, is really, really important. And I think this research will kind of help help lead researchers to her work in a meaningful way.
I hope so. I hope so. It's worth remembering that one of the reasons that I thought it was important to do oral history work and to set up an archive and record what we were doing is that we're not as long-lived as other groups of people. It's easy to think of important figures in our movement who are no longer there. Adam Reynolds, for example, would be someone that I'm sure would have been really interesting to do a set of poems with. When
you were putting together the cohort for electric bodies, I wondered how you went about choosing who you would interview.
First thing was I wanted it to be all established artists, people who'd made some sort of significant contribution to disability arts. And on the whole, I wanted it to be people whose work I knew, just because it was easier for me to work out what was there, what needed to be said, what needed to be explored. But then doing a group, we tried to get a reasonable sort of spread of people. I'm sorry we didn't find anybody learning disabled to include. That's the one big gap that I'd point to.
maybe there are future opportunities to do more.
Let's hope so. Yeah.
I think one of the things that the electric bodies cycles do is to record a certain time in history. There's a sort of kind of sociological research there, I think, in terms of that, the brutality of the 70s and 80s and how disabled people were treated and regarded then.
I think there are things that if you told the average Guardian reader that these things happened in the 1930s, they'd say, yes, that was a terrible time, wasn't it? We're very enlightened in those days. But tell them that it happened, within our lifetime. That's quite shocking. There is a kind of link to see between quite different experiences that people have had, but they come from the same sort of mindset, between things like Catherine not being able to move because they wouldn't give her an electric wheelchair until she was 10 or something, and Robin Surgener talking about having all these pointless operations to make him to break his legs and stretch them and whatever, so he'd walk a little bit more normally.
Similar with Matt Fraser, isn't it? And with the all of the devices that they were trying to give him arm extensions and.
Yeah, I can remember, because I'm just old enough to remember the thalidomide thing when it first started breaking, and there were lots and lots of stories about all these prosthetics that were being developed, which practically nobody used, actually. And the reason for that are very straightforward. There's a thing you can find online where Matt does a strip tease wearing prosthetic arms, and one of the things he takes off is the two prosthetic arms. And actually, you can see there that he's not able to undo the buttons on his shirt until he's got rid of the fucking prosthetics.
Yeah.
They're not just unhelpful; they're actually a hindrance. But I'm glad we got all that stuff from Matt, because the thalidomiders will be gone in a few decades. It'll be a thing that happened in the 20th century that'll be kind of forgotten about, and because there was only quite a short period where it was being given to pregnant women, and so that they're like a group of people who are all in the same class at school. They've gone through the same things at the same sort of time as each other, and now they're moving into old age and dying. And it won't be long till the whole lot of them are gone. And I think they deserve to be something a bit better than a historical sidelight.
Absolutely. What other useful things for future generations do you think Electric Bodies reveals?
Lots. For example, I'm really pleased that we got Jess Tom's account of her life as somebody with Tourette's. I mean, Jess has, in her own shows, has done a very good job of describing all of that. But there were some very interesting aspects to what she was saying about her schooling and how teachers dealt with her, and how she's come to look back and see how she'd be she'd be given things to do which were actually sort of containing the fact that she'd go wandering around if they didn't give her something to go and do. And she obviously had quite sympathetic teachers. Plus her account of doing Beckett's Not I, which I think was an incredible thing to do, to actually negotiate with the Beckett estate and put a whole new meaning on a key piece of work by one of the leading writers of the 20th century. All the stuff I've done in the past has been from a disability arts perspective. It was quite interesting interviewing Robin Surgener, who's a gold medal winning Paralympian, bring a sports angle to it, which is something I've not looked at before. And he had a very interesting story to tell about how he got into swimming, basically by being given hydrotherapy, and sort of took it from there. Putting them all beside each other, it's great to show that there are lots of different stories to tell. Plenty of parallels between them. But it's not like just, oh, this is what it's like to be a disabled person, and they're all the same. It's a whole set of very different stories.
I think Vicky Rayford Sinnott comes very much from a regional perspective. A story about Ireland and a story about the Northeast.
Yeah, I think that's excellent, and also bringing in some stuff from a farming background. There's a really interesting story. I don't know if we put it in the book, but certainly in the longer cycle, there's a poem based on how when her father had a stroke, she went with him to buy a new tractor or something, and saw how he was being treated in a way that he wouldn't have been treated 6 months earlier because he wasn't disabled then. That's a story I haven't heard before. And I think Vicky is a really important person in her own right, so it's really good to hear her story and to get some recognition that disability arts did exist outside London.
The Northeast, Newcastle, were absolutely pivotal to the development of disability arts in the early 1990s.
Right.
And it seems a terrible waste, a shame that significance isn't documented more.
Yeah.
The work of the National Disability Arts Forum and the Northern Disability Arts Forum aren't kind of recorded, and I think that section with Vicky kind of does that to some extent.
Yeah. So it would be good to see some sort of local project developing to do that on a local level. In
a more kind of general respect, though, the Electric Bodies book, I think we've talked about the value of it to researchers, to academics, and from a kind of historical and sociological perspective, but I think it has a wider appeal as a set of biographies.
I've long had a concern for the potential disabled artists of the future, that have we left enough behind that they will know they're not the first? doesn't necessarily mean that they have to copy us. But even if people just disagreeing with us and saying, God, I'm not going to turn out rubbish like Colin Hambrook, that old stuff. Oh, but something to place themselves, something to give them the idea that then, that what they're doing is, it's not ridiculous to think of achieving things, being an artist, and to have some realization of how other people have tackled that and what sort of messages they've left. So I think this book is potentially part of that process.
I think it explains quite a lot of the barriers.
Yes.
I suspect that for disabled people of future generations, the barriers will shift and change, and there's a certain amount of unpredictability in how barriers will change.
Yes.
But ways of addressing barriers and of ways of kind of I don't want to say overcoming, but ways of taking those barriers down there will always be similar approaches that will be important, just in terms of coming together collectively.
Yeah.
And finding,
and
we can talk about our experience.
And I would hope we can teach people in the future the importance of recognizing when there are barriers and overcoming them or disregarding them or just dealing with them. It's like one thing that our generation has, but was a lot of the barriers were very obvious. So it was kind of easy to see what needed to be done, that the buses needed to be accessible, that people needed to be able to get into art schools and drama schools and whatever. I think these days people face, there are still barriers, but they're not quite so overt, not quite so easy to see. And young people saying, I'm not a disabled artist, I'm just an artist, may have the cards more stacked against them than they're aware.
It might be interesting to take younger disabled artists through this process and find out where the, what differences are, where changes happened. I mean, it was quite interesting with this cohort of 8 that everyone came from a very different background in terms of impairment and in kind of geographically and socially, but there were huge similarities.
I think some of the things you only kind of realize over time. I spent a lot of time trying to write for television, and only gradually realizing how powerful the gatekeepers were and how negative their attitudes were, and how difficult it would be to do the sort of thing that I wanted to. I mean, I had commissions from Channel 4 several times, and each time I did, a thing that I always really wanted to write about was how disabled people get fucked up by their parents and teachers and non-disabled people. And commissioning editors really didn't want to hear about that. Whereas I always wanted to try and find ways of pointing the finger a bit. I mean, it's quite interesting to see throughout all the 8 things. You've got a bunch of people who have fairly similar outlooks on the world, who don't feel they've got to tug their forelocks all the time, who have quite a clear sense of what's right and wrong about what happens to disabled people.
And it's quite compelling as a read.
Yeah, and it's good to see the pictures illustrated as well. To see the poems illustrated. I think your pictures in the book really contribute a lot.
I hope they're interesting anyway, even if they don't get the humour, that they find them interesting.
I hope so, and I hope the little selections of poems in the book will take some people to reading the full cycles.
Thanks very much, Alan. It's been great to chat. It's great to have the book, and
hopefully we can guide people to the D4D website a bit more readily now as well, where they can see the full cycles.
I hope so. And the pictures are on the website, aren't they?
The animations are on the website, yeah.
Animations using the poems, yeah. Great. Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it.
Visit greyeye.org and disabilityarts.online for details of productions, events, interviews, opinions, reviews, and learning opportunities.